We're waiting a few more seconds for more people to sign in, and we'll start very shortly. Hello and welcome to Sequel's webinar, Sequel Presents A Coffee With. I'm Kate Goodman, I'm Managing Director of the Good Comms Company, and I've worked with brands such as Molson Coors, Dignity, RAC and Inchcape UK in recent years. I'm here today to interview Sequel's Head of Insight, Paul Jones, on the top 5 employee engagement trends to embrace in 2022. Before we begin, just a bit of housekeeping. You know the rules. The session will be recorded and made available to request on Sequel's website, so you can share it with your colleagues or even watch it again. Please ask questions or add comments in the Q&A section as we go. Now, before we get into into my interview with Paul, let's have a quick look at a short video. Hi, hello, Paul. That was a quick whistle-stop tour through the report. Have you got your coffee ready?
Yeah, all ready to go.
Me too. Right. So you said that the 2021 Trends Report was the most difficult so far because trying to make predictions in the middle of a pandemic is tricky to say the least. Was this one any easier?
It definitely was. Yeah, but you're right. It was a particularly tricky one last year. Things were changing so quickly. We were deep in the middle of the pandemic then. We didn't probably realize it at that moment, but even at that time, there were certainly some clear themes that were coming out, particularly around hybrid working. That seemed to be the big change, the big direction of travel, and everything that really flowed from that in terms of digital transformation and making sure that we give people the digital tools they need to keep in touch and collaborate and work wherever they are. Making sure that we work hard to keep our culture strong as well, because that's been a challenge in the last couple of years, and well-being as well, given that lockdowns especially were so difficult for so many people. And then this year, last autumn really, when we sat down as an insight team and started to think about what this year's report would look like, we realized that a lot of the topics that we were coming back to were very similar to those from 2021, because the new COVID variants that we'd had, some of the new restrictions that we'd seen had really slowed the pace of change. So our client organizations had these big plans, particularly around hybrid working and introducing this new model, but they'd had to hit the pause button really because of all those changes, all those restrictions. So for this year's report, we didn't just want to repeat what we said last time. It wouldn't have been much fun to write that. Certainly wouldn't have been much fun to just read the same thing again. But what we did instead was go back and look at some of the predictions that we've made in the last few years and see how they'd played out. Some we got right, some we got wrong, and also how they evolve, or how we thought they would evolve during the course of this year. So for anybody who hasn't seen the report so far, that's what you'll find in this year's document.
Absolutely, it's a really good read. And hybrid working, it seems to be a buzzword that we're all hearing about these days, but we know that a lot of companies are treating it in different ways. So do you think that's still the key, or do you think that's changed in the last year?
I do think it is still the key. I think it is the big change that's come out of the pandemic from a communication and a work experience point of view. And I know it may not be the greatest sample size, but what I can say is every organization that I've spoken to about this in the last year to 18 months has said that hybrid is the model for them. They want to try to get the best of both worlds and give people that freedom, because as we've seen, some things are better done in a collaborative space, done together, but there's many things that you can do working from home. So if you can get the best of both worlds there's a lot of potential for improvement. And I'm sure there are some organizations at different ends of the scale, some saying we want everybody back in the office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, or some saying keep working at home indefinitely. But I'm sure they're few and far between. There have been a couple of stories we've seen in the media, particularly from the more traditional organizations like banking firms, for instance, have said, we want you back in the office. And it's just ended up alienating those employees, and it's really backfired. And some of them have backtracked already. So I think most will be in the middle ground. But I think from a comms perspective, it's also crucial that we remember that there are a lot of employee groups who just won't have the freedom to work in a hybrid way. There's a lot of people working in factories and warehouses, laboratories. They're out digging up roads and fixing stuff, and they just don't have that freedom. So if we just keep bombarding people with hybrid, and what a great change this is, that has the potential to irritate some of those groups who don't have that flexibility. And even for people who will be working in a hybrid way for the first time, everybody is going to have a different experience. And I know you can't see it at the moment because of my background, but I'm working from home today. I'm very fortunate. I know I've got the space to have a proper desk and a proper chair, and I've got 3 screens in front of me, which is really helpful for a lot of the work that I do. But I know there are a lot of people who spent the last couple of years working off a tiny laptop screen perched on the edge of their bed or a kitchen table, and it's a very different experience for them. So again, if we just treat everybody as part of one audience, there's the potential for some of those messages to backfire. So, I mean, it's the classic comms point, isn't it? You have to start with understanding your audience, and always important, but especially at the moment, I think, because of those different challenges, different experiences.
Absolutely right, Paul. I know in the industries I've worked in, particularly things like the RAC, where you've got 2,000 patrols out on the road, they haven't got access to things like the internet or email easily. People in breweries, our funeral directors at Dignity Funerals, for example. And yet, you can sort of worry that actually it'll become quite lemon us and quite siloed, and sort of, it's already quite hard to engage those people and have that lemon us kind of mix. So I think probably digital transformation is probably a huge tool, and whether it can reach those disparate audiences as well. So there has been a huge amount of change in digital transformation in the last couple of years. So what do you think the key is in getting that process right for everybody?
For me, I think it starts with the planning. We've worked on so many projects of this kind in the last few years, and the ones that are most effective are the ones where you get that planning right from day one, particularly around the different tools and the different channels that you've got and how they work together, how they complement each other, how you avoid overlap as well. And I'm sure a lot of people will have heard me say this before, but the most common complaint that we hear from employees when we go in and start working with a new organization is that those employees are just overwhelmed by all the different tools they've got. They've got so many at their fingertips, and they just don't know how they fit together, how they work together, which one to use when, and how to use them as well. And especially for a suite like Microsoft 365, which is by far the most popular suite at the moment. I know some of our clients use Google's G Suite and other platforms, but with all of these, if you just switch on all of those tools and let people find their own way, it's just a recipe for disaster, really. In fact, we had this in a workshop yesterday. We were talking to people about the digital tools they have, and just asking what on the surface seems like a relatively simple question about how people make a video call when they need to have a meeting. And just in this small group, we had some people who were using Microsoft Teams, some who were using Zoom, some were using WebEx. There are a couple of people using Google Hangouts. And there's even one person who said in their team they were using WhatsApp because that's what they started using at the start of the pandemic, and they've just never got out of the habit. So very quickly, you end up with 6, 7, 8 tools that basically do the same thing. And I always think for new recruits, somebody going in to a business, and there's so much to take on board that first day, that first week. if you just want to make a video call or set up a meeting, you've got 6 different tools that can do that. Where do you even start? That's when we start to lose people. And it's really hard to get change moving at that point, because they'll just go back to what they know. They'll just stick with the old ways of doing things, and you miss out on all the potential benefits. And also showing people how those different tools work and how you want them to be used in your business, because everybody's approach is slightly different. And if you don't give people that guidance, you'll just end up with 10 different pockets of the business using that same tool in 10 different ways. And for something as simple as some of those 365 tools, don't take Planner as an example, the project management tool. If you're a member of 10 different planner boards and each of them is set up in a different way, it's so confusing to have to work between them and think, right, I'm in this board now, this one's set up in this particular way, and I'm going to move over to another one set up in a completely different way. Again, that's something that really overwhelms people, and they'll just check out. And once they're gone, it's really, really difficult to get them back.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I know I'm sort of switching between Teams and Zoom and WhatsApp and Slack and Jira and all that kind of stuff all the time. It's just like, oh my goodness, how do you keep track? So yeah, I completely get that. So when you talk about people getting overwhelmed when they're new to an organisation, I have heard stories of people joining a new organisation and leaving really soon after, because they realised they didn't have the digital tools they'd come to expect and they need to do their job well. So we've heard about the Great Resignation. What else do you think has been contributing to that? And there's been a lot of people moving jobs in 2021 and reassessing where they want to be.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, hasn't it? There's just so many people who have moved, and there are lots of reasons for that from what we can see. And some of that, I think, has just been a byproduct of the pandemic, and people just had to change roles to stay afloat and keep earning money. But what we're starting to see now in terms of the HR research is that often it's a general sense of just being dissatisfied, whether it's with the culture or with the lack of purpose in the role that you have, or where you feel the organization is going. And it's been really interesting to see that for so many people, just having that a culture that fits with your values and the way that you want to work, it seems much more important than actually how much they get paid. So they're much more likely to leave an organization if they don't connect with the culture, as opposed to not being paid enough. And one of the themes that we talk about, one of the concepts that we talk about in this year's Trends Report, is this idea of what's called languishing, which is where your motivation just isn't quite there. It takes a bit of a hit. You just don't feel like you can focus properly. You feel just like you're drifting, really. And I think there's a lot that we can do in terms of comms and HR to help people get that sense of purpose. And we call it clarity of purpose. It's one of our 4 pillars of communication, but other people might call it line of sight, or having a golden thread that connects everything you do together. It's basically the same kind of principles, but it's about us giving employees that sense of purpose and showing how what they do day to day helps their team, and then how their team helps their organization. And if we can make those connections, if we can help people to feel that what they're doing is meaningful and actually has purpose, then they're much more likely to thrive and to stay with the organization. And I don't think we need to hit people over the head with it every time. We don't need to start every internet article by saying, well, this is a story about being an ethical neighbor, or whatever your particular goal is. We can be much more subtle about it. We can reinforce those themes at a much lower level, keep reinforcing them, keep embedding them in what we do every day. So it becomes part of our day-to-day storytelling. From an HR perspective, we can build it into the personal development process, so people are actually measured on things that are meaningful, and actually helps to inform their development and the skills that they want to improve. And also from a leadership perspective, if we can work with our leaders to encourage them to link back to that purpose and make those connections in everything that they're talking about, then that can really help as well, and help people to see that what they're doing is actually of value and making a difference, and gives them that sense of purpose. And it's that age-old question, really. I think if I went for lunch in a couple of hours and just didn't come back, would anybody notice? Would the business notice? And if you can't answer that question, or it's a definite no, then that's a pretty good idea that you don't feel that what you're doing is actually meaningful and making a difference. And then when lots of people feel that way, of course, there's a huge impact on the organization. You're just not going to achieve what you want to achieve.
Absolutely. Everybody needs that sense of purpose, don't they? So, and talking of leaders, this is a crucial group at the best of times, but it feels like that's even more of the case at the moment as organisations try to embed a new way of working. So leaders that I've worked with in the past couple of years have seemed more open to doing things in a different way, and which is really heartening. And they've been more open and more authentic and more genuine in the way they communicate. Have you experienced the same with your clients?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it is one of the big communication changes that we've seen during the pandemic. And what's been really interesting for us to note is just how much employees have noticed that change and how important it's been for them. And I think part of that comes from, especially early on in the pandemic, those Teams and Zoom calls just lent themselves to being a bit more informal. So it gave people a chance to be a bit more open and a bit more authentic, really. And I know there's some companies out there that have set up games of Zoom bingo, where you can tick things off if a small child wanders into the room, or you have a cat walking across your keyboard, and all these things that can distract us during the online meetings. But I think, like I say, in those early days, there was more of a sense of everybody being in it together and working things out on their own. It just lent itself to a more informal style, and that really went down well. Like I say, people noticed. And I think we were probably headed in that direction anyway. Certainly with some of the leaders that we work with going back 2.5, 3 years now, there seemed to be this move away from the very formal, very corporate style of communication to try to be more open and genuine. But now we've had this experience over the last couple of years. There's just no way we can let our leaders go back to death by PowerPoint and endless slides of corporate language. It'd be too much of a contrast to what we've seen in the last year or so, particularly. So we have to encourage people to stick with that change. And if we can help them as well by creating strategic narratives, so the story is clear and agreed and consistent, and really gives them the building blocks to share those stories, then I think that will make a big difference as well, because that's another frustration we hear from a lot of employees, that hearing different things from different people just drives them up the wall. Even small things like if you're talking about your digital transformation, you might have some leaders talking about your digital workplace, some talking about a modern workplace, some about a modern digital workplace, and it gets confusing for people. It's frustrating, and from a comms point of view, I think it has a big hit on your credibility as well, and it makes it harder to make those messages connect.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to sort of keep those messages connected and consistent. Otherwise, people are just going to turn off and don't trust you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we talked about leaders, and I think we have seen a wholesale change in leaders, but the population I bang on about quite a bit is line managers, because they're often and I was on a seminar about this before on a coffee with about the frozen middle. So what about them? How can we get any change program off the ground without support from this group? It's impossible to. So how can we support them and get them to embed hybrid working in their organisations when they're probably feeling a squeeze from top and bottom?
Yeah, you're right. It's such an important audience. And I think, again, there has been change in the last few years, and more organisations now seem to be realising that, well, it's a cliche, I know, but it's a cliche for a reason. But many line managers get promoted because they're brilliant at what they do. They've got really good technical skills. They're a great scientist or engineer or salesperson or whatever it is they do. And quite often those communication skills haven't really been considered as part of that. Quite often we hear from line managers that nobody's ever really explain to them how important it is to communicate with their teams. They just don't appreciate that that's a core part of their role. And of course, there's so much research to show just how important those relationships with line managers are. It accounts for a huge amount of the way that we feel about our work and the company that we work for. So I think it is really important to give those line managers support, because it's a difficult thing to do, especially when now you might have members of your team spread across many, many different locations. So certainly training is an option if you've got the time to be able to work with line managers and persuade them of the value of communication, really. When they've got so many demands on their time, they've got so many different things to do. Why should talking to their teams be a fundamental part of what they do day to day? Sometimes they don't see the value in that, so we can help from that perspective. But also giving them the tools and the resources and the guidance to go and have good conversations with their people. And one of the things we've seen work really well is creating an online space. So that line manager community can learn from each other and share ideas. And it can be quite low tech, can just be a shared area in Microsoft Teams. Doesn't have to be anything super duper. But if you can give them that place to learn from each other, and also to learn in secret as well. This is something that a lot of line managers tell us, that they quite often don't have confidence about some of their core communication skills. And it's very difficult when you're expected to know things like that. It's difficult to go to your line manager and say, do you know what? I'm not really sure how to put a presentation together or how to run a team meeting. So if we can give them access to tools and resources that help them to learn those things almost in secret, then that can work really well as well. And at the moment, I think line manager role really feeds into well-being and that particular area. We have to help line managers create that culture of care. And as I was saying earlier, so many people have found lockdowns in particular really difficult. And we need to help line managers to notice when things aren't quite right. And there's a couple of themes we talk about in the trends report. One that people probably be more familiar with, which is presenteeism, where people are expected or encouraged to be on site as much as possible. And often that means working at the office till 8 o'clock every night because you think that's the best way to show that you're working hard and having an impact. And of course, if line managers encourage that or turn a blind eye to it, then hybrid working is never going to get off the ground at all. But the other one that was new to me and I hadn't heard about until a few months ago is what's called leaveism, where people book annual leave or book holiday to catch up on their work because they're so overworked and overwhelmed, and actually will take holiday to just clear out their inbox or write that report that they haven't got around to yet without the distraction of emails or Teams messages coming in. And again, if line managers encourage that or turn a blind eye to it, it's going to be just impossible to make hybrid work. And more than that, you can imagine just the impact that's going to have on individuals in terms of exhaustion and burnout. Is a real recipe for disaster there.
Oh, it really is, isn't it? You're not going to get the best out of people if they continue to do that. And so it's a really key area for education, I think, and an investment. I think if I was like planning my budget, so I'm planning my time for this year, I'm certainly thinking, actually, let's leave the tangible channels alone and actually let's invest the time and the money into that population because they're so crucial. Yeah, gosh. So much of what we're talking about this morning comes down to people, people in general, doesn't it? It's about making our communication human, giving people purpose, understanding what's important to them, being accessible. What do you think of that?
I think it's just so important. There's a quote that I use a lot, which really resonates with me. It's from Mark Twain, and he talks about us having 2 ears and 1 mouth. So we should use them in proportion and do much more listening than we do talking. And I think that picture has generally got better in terms of internal comms in the last few years. There does seem to be more listening going on, more regular measurement. And we do need that regular flow of information because things change so quickly at the moment. You can't just wait around and once every 5 years check in with people and see how they're feeling because it's just too late by then. And you might have noticed that some of the changes in 365 are moving in that direction as well. There's one particular tool called Viva Insights, which every day it will just pop up a couple of times and just ask you how you're feeling and how your day is going. And it is a way for you as an individual just to, I suppose, be a bit more mindful about how things are going and just track your emotions and feelings over a period of time. But I think we can use a similar approach in terms of assessing how our messages are connecting, how new channels are working, how change programs are going. If we just check in with people more regularly, and it might just be a small group, it might just be a group of project champions or something like that. It doesn't have to be going out to the whole organization, but just get that regular check-in, that regular flow of information to help us refine what we're doing and make sure that we're giving people actually what they need. But also, I think now is a really good time as hybrid starts to take shape after this pause, this delay. I think it's a really good time to assess what we're doing from a communication perspective overall, because there may be things that we were doing 2.5, 3 years ago that were great for then, but are not right for what we need right now to make hybrid work. And there may be some difficult questions to answer about some of the established channels that we've got. And just as a random example, maybe there's an email newsletter that we've been doing for a few years that was great at the time, but doesn't quite give people what they need now. And maybe what people are clamoring for is to make more of our Yammer communities and put more content there, make it more social, or they'd really value a quick podcast that they can listen to when they go for their lunchtime walk. I think for all of these things, it's about listening and making sure that we're actually giving people the information that they need in the way that is right for them now. And like I say, maybe there'll be some things that we're doing in the past that we just need to rethink to fit this new way of working. And the only way to know is to ask people and to listen to them and find out actually what they want and what would be helpful.
Absolutely. It comes down to something as simple as that, just be asking people what they want. And I think that's so important that we keep doing that as communicators and making sure we're connected to people all the time to see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I can see we've had some questions come in. So I've got a question here. So what about those people who can't work in a hybrid way? So people like, I suppose, our funeral directors, our dustmen, that kind of thing.
I think for that group, from what we've seen, the digital transformation side is just as important. We tend to focus on things like 365 tools more for traditionally office-based people, but during the pandemic, we've certainly seen that those factory or warehouse employees have really valued things like Teams and Yammer just as much as people in kind of office type roles. There was a survey, I think, out a couple of weeks ago that talked about the way that people use technology to reduce stress as well in the workplace. And it was really interesting from that one that frontline employees were really at the top of that list. They really said that these kind of tools help them to manage their stress at work as well. So I think making sure that we build those groups into our digital transformation plans is really, really important. So it seems like sales teams in particular really value things like Yammer when they're out and about all day and might feel a little bit isolated, don't feel so connected to their colleagues, that just being able to jump into those more social conversations really seems to benefit them. So again, I think it just comes back to understanding what people actually need and making sure that the messaging we give them is relevant and in a way and is in a format that is right for that particular group.
Definitely, it's digital's less of a barrier than it ever has been. So.
Yeah, definitely.
Another question here as well that's come in, Paul. What if you're well into your digital transformation and it's not going as well as you hope for? If you're in that nightmare scenario, what's your advice?
Yeah, and it's a common one, especially at the start of the pandemic. People had to move so quickly and just get tools up and running. We know there were some organizations that had been planning to introduce suites like 365 and weren't quite ready to do it, but just had to push the button and get things out there. And like I was saying earlier, I think it's really about getting the planning right. But if you don't have time to do that, or you're trying to reinvent what you've already got, you can still do some of the same things. You can still look at that channel mix and see how the different tools work together, and see if you as a project team have that clarity about the different tools and channels that you've got. Make sure that there's no overlap. So the example I was giving earlier about video calls, all of those kind of tasks that you carry out day to day, ask people what approaches they have, what tools they have, what tools they're using for those tasks, and see where you've got crossover. Where can you simplify it? And you may be paying for things that you actually don't need anymore. Maybe you're paying for WebEx licenses that you can switch off because you can shift people to Teams. Maybe you can stop paying for SurveyMonkey or PollDaddy because you can move to Microsoft Forms. So you might save a little bit of money by going through that process as well. But yeah, I think if you look at that channel mix and just make sure that it's right for your people right now, that's a good place to start. And then everything else will flow from that into your communication and your training. You might find that people are asking for more guidance about some of the more detailed features within Teams, or they want to start using Planner within their groups, but they haven't been shown how to use them. All of that will flow from getting that channel mix right, first of all.
I think that's really important. And again, it comes down to education, doesn't it? Showing people what's what. I think we've got time for one more final question that's coming. I think it's a good one. My CEO still communicates in a very formal way. We've encouraged him to be more authentic, but he's finding it difficult to change. Any ideas?
Now, that is a tough one. I've seen this a couple of times, and it's not a good conversation to have. It's not an easy one. But from my experience, if you can go in with a little bit of genuine employee feedback and use that to shape that conversation, that really helps. So if you can go in and say, well, people really respond to this. They love it when you approach communication in this type of way. So let's do more of that. But on the other hand, this thing that you do, this approach that you have, isn't quite connecting with people. So let's try to dial that down a little bit. And that's really helpful, rather than just going in and saying, people say your presentations are hopeless. That's never going to end well. And maybe you can get other senior leaders to be role models as well, and rely on them a little bit more, and just use them as the gold standard, and try to shift that CEO to be a little bit more like that. Or just look at other examples. Just go and look on YouTube for great examples of leadership presentations, or look at TED Talks and different kind of approaches, just to see if something sparks that change. But I think having the evidence of feedback from employees is the key thing to have, because then you can use that to make your case, and then go back a few months later and hopefully show that there's been a change. And from my experience, when you can do that and actually show that evidence that people have noticed and people appreciate that change, it really helps to embed that and make sure they don't go back to the old way of doing things.
Thank you, Paul. It's really great advice, and good luck.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, so I think that's all we've got time for today. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I really hope you enjoyed the session. It's been great being on this side of the camera for a change. And bye, cheerio, till next time.